Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
A cardiothoracic surgeon paid a beggar to clean her husband's grave. But when she returned a week later, she was stunned. Instead of cleaning. Dear friends, welcome to our channel, where every story is a journey into the depths of the human soul. While this story plays out, please write in the comments where you're listening from today. And now, our story begins. The greenish light of the operating room reflected in Paloma Mendoza's eyes, frozen in focused tension. The silence, broken only by the steady beeping of the cardiac monitor and the muffled breathing of those present, enveloped the room like an invisible cocoon. A tiny heart, the size of a 6-year-old boy's fist, beat under her fingers, trustingly and vulnerably. "Clamp," she said softly, and the instrument, handed to her by the assistant, fell into her palm with habitual precision. Paloma saw nothing but the tiny defect in the interventricular septum. Her fingers moved with incredible precision, as if someone was guiding them from within. She felt this heart as her own, every beat, every pulse of blood. Mentally, she spoke to it. "Hold on, little one, just a little more. Soon you'll be healthy and strong. Dr. Mendoza, blood pressure is dropping," the voice of the anesthesiologist reached her. "I see," Paloma replied calmly, without taking her eyes off the surgical field. "Everything's under control." No one in the operating room noticed how her fingers briefly touched an antique medallion hidden under her surgical gown, a simple metal oval with an engraved image of the Altamira, securely attached to a thin chain. The 3-hour operation ended successfully. The boy's heart, freed from the pathological hole, was beating steadily and strongly. As Paloma was leaving the operating room, she overheard a conversation between two young interns. "Magical hands, there's no other way to put it," one said. "They say she hasn't had a single fatal outcome." "Impossible," the other disagreed. "Stats don't lie. But did you see how she saved that boy today? The blood pressure dropped, and she didn't even flinch." Paloma didn't listen further. She knew the value of these stories and the value of her luck. It wasn't luck at all. In the on-call room, she allowed herself a minute to rest. Closing her eyes, she took out the medallion and ran her thumb over the metal darkened by time. The image of her grandmother Carmen, so vivid as if they had seen each other just yesterday, appeared before her eyes. "You are my continuation, Palomita," her grandmother used to say, braiding her hair with warm, herb-scented hands. "My blood runs through you, and my gift will be yours." A little casita on the outskirts of the village near Bogota, surrounded by a fence tangled with passionflower vines. Herbs hung on the walls, filling the rooms with a bittersweet medicinal scent. And people, an endless stream of people, coming with their pains and worries, to Senora Carmen, known throughout the region as a curandera and healer. Paloma was 8 then. She helped her grandmother collect herbs, learning to distinguish useful plants from poisonous ones, memorizing recipes for broths and tinctures. But most of all, she absorbed something intangible, something that couldn't be explained in words. "Why do people come to you, Grandma?" Little Paloma asked, watching another healed person bow to her grandmother. "Because they believe, dear. And I believe in them. It's not the herbs that heal, Palomita, but love and faith. The herbs are just helpers." In the evenings, grandmother taught her to place her hands on painful spots, to feel where the pain hid, to see it with inner sight. "Your hands are special," Grandma Carmen would say. "Warm. Alive. Such hands draw the pain away." Her mother and father didn't approve of these lessons. Her mother was a teacher, her father an engineer, both believed in science and progress. Grandma's superstitions, her mother would scoff when she caught them having another session. But grandmother would only smile mysteriously. When it came time to choose a profession, no one doubted that Paloma would follow in her mother's or father's footsteps. A teacher, translator, economist, those are worthy professions for a girl, her parents said. But Paloma applied to medical school in Bogota. "Hija, think carefully," her father advised. "Surgery isn't a woman's job. You'll have to cut people open." "I won't cut, I'll heal," Paloma replied with the same determined furrow between her brows that so often appeared on Grandma Carmen's face. And only her grandmother supported her. "Follow your heart, Palomita," she said, placing an old medallion into her granddaughter's palm. "It won't deceive you." A month later, Grandma Carmen passed away. As if passing the baton to her granddaughter, she quietly passed away in her sleep with a serene smile on her lips. A phone call interrupted Paloma's memories. On the screen, the name Valeria Navarro appeared, a school friend and perhaps the only close person left in Paloma's life. "The operation is over? How are you?" came the familiar anxious voice through the receiver. "All good," Paloma replied, feeling a wave of fatigue wash over her. "The boy will live. I've booked a table at El Patio in the city center. In an hour." "No objections," Valeria stated authoritatively. A tired smile tugged at Paloma's lips. Valeria had always been like that, fast and decisive. A rider with the soul of a battalion commander. They met at a cozy cafe in the heart of the Colombian city, where Valeria had already ordered her favorite herbal tea and cinnamon pastries. "You've really overdone it," Valeria said, giving her friend a critical once-over instead of a greeting. "Your third complicated surgery this week." "I know, I got your schedule from the head nurse." "Too many kids and not enough surgeons," Paloma shrugged. "No one but me." "No one but you," Valeria mimicked. "Listen, Paloma, it's been 4 years already. You can't hide from life in the operating room forever." Paloma looked away. What was there to talk about? That life without Diego had become an endless series of workdays, broken up by rare meetups with her friend. "You know, today I hosted a delegation from Spain at my school for the first time," Valeria changed the subject. "A really interesting professor came." "Don't start," Paloma shook her head. "Your attempts to introduce me to interesting professors have already become legendary. Not everyone can be workaholic loners." Valeria exclaimed. "You're not just a doctor, Paloma. You're also a woman. And who said one thing prevents the other?" Paloma answered with a tired smile, absent-mindedly stroking the medallion. After dinner, while driving her car, Paloma made a decision. In a week, it would be Diego's birthday. According to the long-established tradition, she would visit the cemetery the day before and tidy up his grave before the new workday began. Outside the window, the April rain rustled, softly drumming on the car's roof. Paloma looked at the road, but saw something else: Diego's dark eyes, his swift smile, the blueprints spread out on the floor of their living room. "I build for eternity, Paloma," he said, showing the restoration projects of historical buildings in Bogota. He left suddenly, absurdly, with the collapse of construction scaffolding and instant death. She was left with a void inside and a gift that proved insufficient to save the one closest to her. The medallion was once again in her fingers. "It's not the herbs that heal, but love and faith," the voice of Grandma Carmen seemed to whisper. Love and faith. The things Paloma lost 4 years ago at the construction site with Diego. The things she still had to regain. The morning was surprisingly clear, as if the sky had been washed by last night's rain. Paloma slowly drove down the winding road to the old city cemetery, holding field flower seeds on the passenger seat: cosmos, marigolds, calendulas. "Wildflowers have strength," Grandma Carmen used to say. "They freely choose where to live." Paloma stopped the car at the old wrought iron gates, took the bouquet and a small bag with cleaning tools, and walked down the main avenue deep into the cemetery. Here, amid the silence broken only by the voices of birds, time seemed to move by its own rules, leisurely and smoothly, like Grandma's pendulum clock. With each step on the gravel beneath her feet, the thought that had been in her mind since waking became clearer: she wouldn't have time today to tend to the grave. Tomorrow, there was a complex surgery scheduled, a 7-hour heart valve reconstruction for a child with a rare pathology. It was an exceptional case, requiring absolute concentration and preparation. This realization caused a strange feeling, as if she were betraying Diego. For the first time in 4 years, she would break their ritual. The cemetery, sprawling on a gentle hill, resembled a silent city with its streets, intersections, and districts. The left side, old and weathered, contained the family crypts of colonial nobility, marble angels with pensive faces, stone crosses covered in ivy, intricate Latin inscriptions on the darkened slabs. The right side was filled with modest obelisks from modern times, with photographs under glass and humble metal crosses. In the central part, new granite monuments stood tall, cold black stone with golden inscriptions. "Here lies our whole city," Palamita, Grandma Carmen had said when she first brought her here, pointing to the sprawling tree of ancestral burials. "Don't be afraid of the dead, Nyatesida. They've understood everything. It's the living you should be afraid of." Diego's grave was in the new part of the cemetery, near a small chapel. A simple granite monument with an engraved profile. Architect to the last breath, he had designed the sketch himself, which Paloma had found in his papers. "For the great-grandfather" was written in the corner of the sketch, made with a steady hand. Fate had decided otherwise. As Paloma approached the familiar spot, she noticed the small figure of an elderly man, slowly sweeping the path between the graves. Don Ramiro, the cemetery keeper, a small, thin old man with a neat gray goatee and surprisingly sharp eyes that seemed oddly young on his wrinkled face. "Good morning, Dr. Mendoza," he raised his faded Panama hat. "Back to your own? I truly say, such loyalty is to be envied." "Hello, Don Ramiro," Paloma nodded, involuntarily noting how much the keeper had aged over the past year. "How is your health?" "What health do we have?" He waved his hand but smiled. "No complaints. I guard the graves of others, not thinking about my own." Don Ramiro was not just a caretaker, a former historian and archivist. He knew more about the cemetery and its inhabitants than any city chronicler. His fate was simple and sad. After losing his wife and daughter in a car accident, he found a strange solace in this place of eternal peace, amidst silence and memory. "Are you alone again, Don Ramiro? No helpers still?" Paloma asked, noticing how hard the old man leaned on the broom. He smiled, showing his sparse teeth. "Who would come work here? The youth today is looking for something else. And honestly, I don't need anyone. I'm not alone with my thoughts, I'm talking to the whole city." He gestured around the cemetery. "Although, wait, there is one." He suddenly brightened. "Golden Hands. Restores tombstones, fixes the fences." He pointed to the far corner of the cemetery, where the figure of a man bent over an old grave could be seen. "See that man? He's not one of our workers, but he helps more than any regular employee. A rare craftsman. He could also take care of your grave if you're pressed for time." Paloma thought for a moment. The idea of entrusting the care of Diego's grave to a stranger seemed strange. But the upcoming surgery left her no choice. "Maybe this is really the way," she said uncertainly. "Can you introduce us?" The caretaker smiled and, straightening his thin shoulders, walked toward the unknown master. Paloma followed him, admiring the delicately restored fence of an ancient crypt along the way. The thin wrought iron weaving, cleaned of rust, gleamed as new. "Don Sarapin," called the old man. "Here's a lady with a request for you." The man straightened and turned around. Paloma froze. Standing before her was a man in his 40s, tall, with a military posture. His withered, tanned face seemed carved from the same stone he worked with, sharp cheekbones, well-defined lips, a straight nose. But what struck her most were his eyes, gray, piercing, as if they had absorbed all the experiences he'd lived through, yet they remained surprisingly alive. His temples, touched with gray, contrasted with his still dark hair, cut short like a soldier's. "Sarapin Torres," he introduced himself, wiping his hands on a work rag and stepping forward. His voice sounded unexpectedly quiet and deep. "Paloma Mendoza," she replied, extending her hand, which he cautiously shook. "Sorry for the bother." "Well, Don Sarapin," said Don Ramiro. "Our well-known doctor wants to tidy up her husband's grave, but time is tight. I told her about you." The caretaker briefly explained the situation and then, as if recalling urgent matters, shuffled away, leaving them alone. Paloma felt an odd awkwardness. The look of this man, attentive and calm, seemed to penetrate deeper than she wanted. "I can show you my husband's grave," she said. "It needs the fence adjusted, the grass trimmed, flowers planted." "I'll be happy to help," Sarapin simply replied. "Show me." They walked along the cemetery path, and Paloma glanced sideways at her companion. His movements were precise and economical, his posture giving away his military background, and the left hand was missing a pinky. At Diego's grave, Sarapin carefully inspected the fence, ran his hand along the metal surface, checking the fastenings. "The tombstone is beautiful," he said, studying the monument. "An unusual shape." "My husband was an architect," Paloma explained. "He designed it himself." "An architect?" Interest flickered in Sarapin's eyes. "Are there any of his works still in the city?" Paloma smiled involuntarily. "The theater on the central square, the new wing of the museum, the restored library facade." Sarapin nodded respectfully. "Then his creation still serves the people. It's important to leave something behind." In those simple words, there was something deeply personal, and for a moment, Paloma felt a strange connection with this unfamiliar man. "You're very good at restoration," she remarked, watching as he examined the metal of the fence. "Is this your profession?" "A calling, found out of necessity," Sarapin replied. "I restore old tombstones. Some are over a century old, and the history they hold is worth preserving. As they say, I return history to the people." He told her that he could start working tomorrow, renewing the fence, planting the flowers she brought, and tidying up the surrounding area. When it came to payment, there was a pause. Paloma took the money from her bag, the amount in pesos that she considered fair for such work. Sarapin glanced at the bills she offered and gently pulled her hand away. "This is too much." "No, really, the work is extensive," Paloma protested. "You know," he smiled slightly, and his stern face seemed to light up from within, "money is important, but it's not everything. I'll do everything properly, but let me take exactly what the materials and my labor are worth." After a brief dispute, Sarapin finally accepted the payment, but it was significantly less than what Paloma had offered. They agreed that the work would be completed by her return in 3 days. As she left the cemetery, Paloma realized that, for the first time in a long while, she had met someone so unusual in his speech, manners, and outlook on life. There was something that went beyond the ordinary. But these thoughts quickly dissipated, giving way to anxiety about the upcoming surgery. A 7-year-old girl, an orphan from an orphanage near Bogota. A complex heart defect, nearly impossible to correct. These cases come once in a career. Paloma mentally went through the stages of the operation, imagining every step, every movement of the scalpel. And the old medallion around her neck seemed to warm, as if it had been warmed by her fingers, which had unconsciously reached for it when her thoughts turned back to the little sick heart. As often happened with Paloma, the past faded for a moment when a new patient appeared on the horizon, a new heart in need of her hands. The image of the reserved restorer with the perceptive eyes retreated to the background. Memories in Paloma's life were like old photographs, some faded, others retained their brightness, despite time. She rarely allowed herself to go through this album, but today, the day before the operation, the past surged forth, uninvited and persistent. Lying in the dimness of her bedroom, she closed her eyes, and the images of the past swirled beneath her eyelids, like autumn leaves in the whirlpool of time. San Carlos Hospital, Cardiology Department. She, the young resident, soaking up knowledge like a sponge. An elderly man on a hospital bed, her first serious patient, suffering from a myocardial infarction. And his son, tall, awkward, with stormy-eyed gaze, relentlessly standing watch by the bedside. "Don Carlos will definitely get better," she confidently said back then, checking the 4-drip. "He has a strong heart." "Do you promise?" he asked, looking intently at her face. "Doctors never promise," she replied, holding his gaze. "But I'll do everything I can." Recalling that first conversation now, Paloma understood that even then, something had passed between them, a spark, an elusive attraction. And then there were the marigolds, a small bouquet of orange wildflowers left for her at her post. From whom? She asked the attending nurse. From Don Carlos's son, the architect, the nurse smirked. He said you're a good fairy in a white coat. Paloma winced at the cloying comparison but put the flowers in a glass of water. Diego Vargas turned out to be surprisingly persistent. When his father recovered, he invited Paloma for a tour of old Bogota. At first, she refused, citing her busy schedule. Then she agreed to just half an hour. In the end, they talked for 4 hours, wandering through the narrow streets of La Candelaria. Diego talked about architectural styles, the fates of buildings, the secrets hidden behind old facades. His eyes sparkled when he talked about his restoration projects. Can you imagine, he said, forgetting and switching to a more familiar tone, this house remembers the times of Bolivar, and we'll give it another 100 years of life. From that day on, everything took off, phone calls, meetings, talks until dawn. Paloma was captivated not so much by Diego's looks, but by his passion for his work, the determination with which he pursued his goals, the rare combination of dreaminess and business acumen. You bring life to sick hearts, I bring life to old houses, he said one day. We're alike in a way. You save the present, and I save the past. 6 months later, he proposed to her on the roof of a restored bell tower with a view of all of Bogota. I'll build for you, Paloma, he said then. Every project will be a monument to my love. The wedding was modest, only close friends and family. Diego's father, whom Paloma had pulled back from the brink of death, teared up while hugging her. Now I know my son is in good hands. Paloma's mother pursed her lips. She thought the architect wasn't the right match for her doctor-daughter. He could have been a professor, with your talents, she whispered to Paloma before their honeymoon. The first years were happy. They bought a small house on the outskirts of the city and furnished it to their taste. Diego received more and more orders, his name became known in professional circles. Paloma completed her dissertation in pediatric cardiothoracic surgery, and she was invited to perform complex surgeries. They dreamed of having children, but years passed, and pregnancy didn't come. Testing, procedures, IVF attempts, all without result. Don't worry, it's still ahead of us, Diego consoled her, but in his eyes, Paloma saw the pain he tried to hide. Gradually, work began to fill all their time. Diego often came home after midnight, sometimes staying overnight in his workshop, absorbed in his projects. Paloma worked on call, going to the operating room at the first call. The distance between them grew, unnoticed, day by day, like a crack in the foundation. You've become cold, Diego said to her one day. Like your scalpels. And you've become obsessed, she retorted. You only care about your stones. I build for eternity, Paloma, his voice carried bitterness. These buildings will outlive all of us. That's my immortality. Our children could be your immortality, she wanted to say, but remained silent, afraid to hurt him. In that last year, Diego worked on a grand project, the restoration of a historic district in downtown Bogota. Paloma saw his sketches. The revived ensemble was supposed to become the city's jewel, its postcard. A week before the tragedy, they had a big argument. Paloma took a rare vacation. They were planning to go to the coast, but the day before their departure, Diego told her he couldn't leave the construction site. You get a vacation once every 3 years, and I get a chance to create something extraordinary once in my life, he shouted. You don't need a wife, Diego. You need another drafting table, she replied, holding back tears. He slammed the door and left for the site. Paloma stayed at home alone, surrounded by suitcases and unfulfilled hopes. The next day, she received a call from the police. The scaffolding had collapsed. Multiple injuries, incompatible with life. The arriving ambulance crew confirmed the death on the spot. Later it was discovered that the contractor, wanting to save money, used low-quality materials for the scaffolding. The investigation, the trial, the verdict, All of this passed by Paloma, who was submerged in a stupor of grief. She refused to believe what had happened. Until the very last moment, until the closing of the coffin, she thought it was a mistake, that it was not her Diego lying there, with his waxen face and frozen half-smile. And then came the realization, sharp as the blade of a scalpel, her husband was gone forever. And the last words they had said to each other were words of resentment and reproach. Now, for years later, the pain had dulled, but the feeling of guilt remained. She had never forgiven herself for that argument, for the words of love that were not said in time. Paloma turned onto her other side, struggling with the surge of bitterness. Sleep would not come. That same night, on the other side of the city, in a small room next to the cemetery guardhouse, Sarapin Torres was also awake. He was haunted by his own ghosts. The room was lit only by the dim light of a desk lamp. Sarapin sat at the table, carving a miniature rose from a block of cedar, a task that required precision and patience, helping to calm his thoughts when they became too heavy. The knife moved confidently, shaving off thin shavings. Under his hands, the lifeless would gradually transform into a delicate flower, with gracefully curved petals, a thin stem, on which even the thorns seemed fragile. His fingers, calloused from working with stone and metal, retained a remarkable sensitivity to the material. It was as though he could feel the resistance of the wood, its structure, its character. On the wall hung a faded photograph, a group of young men in military uniform, smiling at the camera. Sarapin was among them, 10 years younger, with no gray hair, the same direct gaze, but without the mark of experience in his eyes. The explosion that shattered his world into before and after, he remembered in fragments, a dazzling flash, a ringing silence, in which, miraculously, screams broke through. And then darkness. In the hospital, they said he was lucky, the shrapnel passed a millimeter from his carotid artery. A concussion. Partial hearing loss in his left ear. But it was better than for others. Of their group, 3 out of 8 survived. Coming home was harder than the war. The city met him with indifference, coldness, and strangeness. He did not recognize the streets. They seemed too noisy, too bright, too safe. His wife was the first to break. "You've become a stranger, Sarapin. I don't know how to help you, but I know that I can't go on like this anymore." He did not blame her. She had received not a husband, but his shell, with empty eyes and nightmarish dreams. After the divorce, the wandering began, rented rooms, random earnings. He worked as a loader, a guard, a laborer. But physical labor did not heal the soul, it only exhausted the body. The turning point came when Sarapin accidentally wandered into an old cemetery, looking for his grandfather's grave, whom he vaguely remembered from childhood. There, he met Don Ramiro, who showed him the abandoned graves of the stonecutters from the previous century. The ancient tombstones with half-erased inscriptions, the leaning angels, the rusty fences, for some reason, stirred him. "Here lies the history of our city," Don Ramiro had said. "And no one remembers these people anymore. What a shame." That same day, Sarapin decided to restore the old wrought iron fence at the tomb of Don Manuel Echevarria. He found the tools, cleaned off the rust, and fixed the broken bars. The work absorbed him, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of satisfaction. Since then, he became a frequent visitor to the cemetery. He studied the techniques of the old masters, tried carving in stone himself, restored inscriptions. Gradually, private commissions began to come his way. "Why are you doing this?" Don Ramiro asked him once. "They pay you peanuts, and the work on each grave takes a week." "Stone remembers longer than people," Sarapin had answered. "And it does not judge." His hands moved once more over the wood, carving another petal of the rose. The face of the woman he had met that day flashed in his mind, delicate features, as if carved from ivory, eyes with hidden pain, restrained movements of a person accustomed to solitude. Strangely, in her, he seemed to recognize something akin to his own soul, the same hidden wound, the same persistence with which she continued to live, despite everything. He finished carving just before dawn. The wooden rose was almost alive. It seemed that if you touched it, you would feel its scent. Sarapin gently set the carving aside, planning to take it with him the next day when he went to tidy up the architect's grave. In the morning, Paulina performed the most difficult heart surgery on a child with multiple developmental defects. 6 hours of intense work, where each movement of her fingers determined the fate of a tiny life. And the victory, the tiny heart began to beat on its own, strong and steady. After leaving the operating room, the first thing she did was call the registration desk of the Medical Congress in Cartagena to confirm her participation. Presenting her new method of correcting complex heart defects to her colleagues meant saving dozens, even hundreds, of children's lives. While packing for her 3-day trip, Paulina suddenly caught herself thinking about Sarapin. For some reason, his image kept appearing in her mind, his calm gaze, restrained movements, quiet voice. I wonder if he'll manage the work, she thought while zipping her suitcase. But Don Ramiro has a trained eye, he won't advise anything bad. The plane was approaching her hometown, cutting through the May twilight. Paulina sat by the window, distractedly watching as the landscape outside the glass changed, mountains, valleys, city neighborhoods. The 3 days of the conference left a strange aftertaste, a mix of triumph and emptiness. Her presentation on the new method for correcting complex heart defects in children caused a real stir. Renowned professors shook her hand, young doctors asked for autographs on copies of the presentation. She felt the recognition, but deeper than that, she knew that each word, every drawing, every explanation would save children's lives throughout Colombia. Your approach is revolutionary, Dr. Mendoza, said the silver-haired academic from Bogota. You've combined modern surgery with some almost folk understanding of anatomy, the young cardiologist from Medellin marveled. They had no idea that the origins of the method lay in the words of her grandmother Carmen when she explained to the 8-year-old Paulina how the life juices flow in herbs. Blood must flow through its channels, like a river in its bed. If the bed bends or clogs, trouble is coming. But if you carefully guide the flow, nature will fix it itself. As a child, these words seemed like another one of her grandmother's wise sayings. Now, 30 years later, they formed the basis of a method that minimized the harm done to fragile children's hearts, allowing the body to complete the recovery itself. The familiar city outskirts stretched out beyond the window. Paulina gathered her documents into a briefcase, threw on a light coat. Inside, a vague unease was building, unrelated to the conference or the work waiting for her at home. Barely leaving her suitcase in the hallway, Paulina changed and got into the car. Something was pulling her to the cemetery, perhaps the desire to share her success with Diego, perhaps an inexplicable premonition. The sun was setting, casting slanted rays on the gravestones. Paulina walked down the path covered with young grass, and the strange tension tightened her shoulders more and more. Diego's grave remained untouched. No fresh flowers, no trimmed grass, no renewed fence. Only last year's dry stems and yellowing leaves, blown by the spring wind. Paulina stopped in shock. Disappointment, mixed with irritation, rose like a hot wave. Even he turned out to be unreliable, she thought bitterly, taking a small pair of garden scissors from her bag. Carefully trimming the dry grass, Paulina mentally scolded Diego for everything that had accumulated in her soul, about the conference, about the colleagues, about her loneliness, about how tired she was of being strong. I truly believed that at least this person would keep his word, she muttered aloud, wiping the sweat from her brow. How tired I am of broken promises, Diego. The further I go, the fewer people there are that I can rely on. In the distance, Don Ramiro's hunched figure appeared. Seeing Paulina, the old man quickened his step as much as his aching legs allowed. Dr. Mendoza. You're back, he exclaimed, approaching. I've been waiting for you. Hello, Don Ramiro, Paulina nodded tiredly. As you can see, your protege didn't keep his word. The caretaker's face stretched in surprise. How is that possible? Strange, Sarapin always keeps his word. This has never happened before. He shook his head, leaning on his cane. He disappeared 3 days ago, the old man continued, lowering his voice. No one has seen him. Even his things are still in the guardhouse, including his tools. I thought something had happened to him. Paloma felt her irritation give way to concern. 3 days ago, just when she was leaving for the conference. Maybe he went somewhere? She asked, continuing to trim the grass. Where would he go? Don Ramiro shrugged. His whole life is here, at the cemetery. That's why he lives by the guardhouse. There's nowhere else for him to go. For the first time, Paloma realized that she knew nothing about this man except for his name and his military past. No family, no home, no history, just skilled hands and a watchful eye. I'll finish here and then go, she said, straightening up. Tomorrow back to duty. Don Ramiro nodded and trudged away, his feet dragging on the gravel path. Paloma began planting the marigolds she had brought with her. Diego always loved these cheerful flowers with their sunny petals, as he called them. While clearing the debris from the base of the monument, she suddenly noticed a small object leaning against the granite slab. Paloma reached out and picked it up, a wooden rose, so skillfully carved that it seemed alive, just freshly cut from a bush. Every petal, every curve of the stem, even the tiny thorns, it was all crafted with incredible precision. There was no doubt, it was Sarapin's work. That meant he had started to fulfill this promise, but something had prevented him from finishing it. Paloma gently ran her finger over the wooden flower. It radiated a strange warmth, as if it were a living being. She suddenly felt a pang of unease, sharp as one of the rose's thorns. Leaving the cemetery, Paloma noticed 2 elderly women talking animatedly on a bench by the gate. Funny how things happen, one of them said. Homeless, but such a soul. Saved a child's life at the cost of his own. Hit by a car, they say. The second woman gasped. I heard he's still alive, but unconscious. In the regional hospital, in the ICU. And the little girl? Is she okay? She's fine, just very scared. She's from an orphanage, from the outskirts. She ran into the road, and he saw her, pushed her away. He got hit by the car himself. Paloma froze, listening. Her heart pounded so loudly that it seemed as if the entire cemetery could hear it. The inner voice, the one that had never misled her in the operating room, screamed, "It's him." Without hesitation, she took out her phone and dialed the number. Dr. Castro? Good evening, this is Mendoza. I apologize for the late call. Do you have a patient in your department, a man, about 40, possibly with a military past, hit by a car 3 days ago? A pause, during which Paloma almost stopped breathing. Yes, the one who saved the child. Name? Sarapin Torres? Her fingers clenched around the wooden rose. Is his condition critical? I understand. The world around her seemed to freeze. Paloma didn't remember how she said goodbye to her colleague or how she got to her car. 20 minutes later, she was entering the emergency room at Simón Bolívar Hospital. The smell of medication, the beeping of equipment, muffled voices, everything was familiar, comforting, but tonight the hospital felt foreign and hostile. She walked down the corridor like a visitor, not as one of the leading surgeons. Dr. Castro met her at the ICU doors, tall, heavy-set, with a perpetually messy beard. He was an old classmate and now head of the trauma department. I can give you half an hour, no more, he muttered instead of greeting her. Though I don't understand what connects you to this vagabond. He's not a vagabond, Paloma answered sharply, surprising herself. He's a restorer. He restores old tombstones. Castro grunted. Food for thought. Did you check his pockets too? Besides the worn military ID and 50,000 pesos, there was nothing. No documents, no phone. What injuries does he have? Paloma switched to a professional tone. Traumatic brain injury, broken ribs, a ruptured spleen, we removed it. Internal bleeding was stopped. But he hasn't regained consciousness, he's in a second-degree coma. Sliding the plastic curtain aside, they entered the intensive care unit. On the bed, tangled in wires and tubes, lay Sarapin. His features had become sharp, his skin taking on a pallid hue. Only his hands remained unchanged, strong, with long fingers of a master. She studied the monitor readings carefully, leaned over the bed's head, and checked his reflexes. "Has his blood pressure stabilized?" she asked, standing up. "Only today," Castro nodded. "Before that, it was all over the place. We need to find his relatives." "He has no relatives," Paloma replied quietly, remembering the conversation at the cemetery. She looked at Sarapin's still face and felt an inexplicable connection to this man. It was as if a thin, yet strong thread had stretched between them. A thread woven from random encounters, unspoken words, and a shared understanding of loss. "Castro," she said firmly, "I'm taking this case under my personal care." "But you're a cardiac surgeon," her colleague was surprised. "I'm also a human being," Paloma replied simply. "Sometimes that's more important than specialization." A nurse peeked into the room. "Dr. Castro, time's up. The patient needs his procedures." Paloma nodded and headed for the exit. At the threshold, she turned back, looked once more at Sarapin's still form on the bed. "I will find the thread that connects us," she promised silently. "And I'll untangle this knot of fate." Walking through the evening city to her car, Paloma suddenly remembered her grandmother Carmen's words, spoken long ago. "The strongest thread in life is the one woven from pain and hope. That one cannot be broken by time or distance." In the pocket of her coat, warmed by her hand, lay the wooden rose, a silent promise made by the craftsman, unfulfilled due to an act of heroism that may have cost him his life. 5 days blended into one endless cycle for Paloma: surgeries, rounds, paperwork, and every evening, visits to the trauma ICU. Sarapin remained in a coma, his vitals critically low, and with each passing day, hope melted away like spring snow. That evening, as Paloma entered the room, she felt an especially sharp sense of helplessness. She was used to holding other people's hearts in her hands, guiding their rhythms, healing their wounds. But here, before this motionless body, her skill was useless. "No change," sighed the attending physician, flipping through the chart. "Who should I call if?" He didn't finish, but Paloma understood the unasked question. "Call me," she said firmly. "Anytime." Left alone, she sat next to Sarapin's bed. His hand, limp on the blanket, looked like it had been carved from marble, with visible veins, calluses from tools, and a missing pinky. A hand made for creation, not for war. Paloma gently touched his fingers. "Why did you do it?" she whispered, knowing she wouldn't get an answer. "Who is she, this little girl for whom you risked your life?" In the silence, only the steady hum of the machines could be heard. On the bedside table lay Sarapin's meager personal belongings, an old army medallion, worn to a shine, a scuffed notebook and a leather cover. Paloma carefully picked up the notebook. Inside were drawings of restoration work, sketches of fence patterns, designs for carved decorations. And on the last pages, children's drawings tucked between the sheets. Clumsy, vibrant, signed in big letters, Paulina. Paloma's heart quivered. Paulina, the girl from the orphanage, saved by Sarapin. The little girl who had run into the street. The invisible thread that had tied their fates together. Leaving the hospital, Paloma didn't go home. Something pulled her to the outskirts of the city, where, amid streets overgrown with eucalyptus trees, the old orphanage lay hidden. The decision came to her on its own. She needed to see this girl, to understand what connected her to the silent restorer. The Esperanza orphanage was housed in a colonial-style building that once belonged to the wealthy Don Antonio Mendoza. A 2-story structure with an inner courtyard, once luxurious, now dilapidated, stood deep within the old garden. The whimsical stucco on the facade, carved wooden balconies, and a wide portal with peeling paint all breathed of antiquity and neglect. With a heavy heart, Paloma climbed the stone steps. Inside, the building was brighter and cozier than outside, clean floors, fresh curtains on the windows, children's drawings on the walls. Yet, the stamp of an official institution lay over everything: standard furniture, faded bedspreads in the shared dormitory, the smell of bleach in the hallways. In the director's office, she was met by Senora Luz Maria Garcia, a tall, plump woman in her 60s, with neatly combed back gray hair and piercing brown eyes. "How can I help you?" she asked, scrutinizing Paloma. "If you're from the Child Welfare Department, all reports have been submitted on time." "I'm not from the department," Paloma replied, introducing herself. "I'm a doctor from Simon Bolivar Hospital. I need to see a little girl named Paulina, the one whom the man who was hit by a car saved 3 days ago." The director's face immediately changed, her gaze hardened, her lips pressed into a thin line. "You're the third person to inquire about Paulina," she said coldly. "First her mother showed up after years, now you. What's going on?" The director's voice carried an unmistakable distrust. She straightened in her chair, as if preparing for defense. Paloma explained the situation, about Sarapin's condition, the drawings in his notebook, her desire to understand the connection between him and the child. With every word, Senora Luz Maria's expression softened, her wariness replaced by a sad understanding. "His name is Sarapin," she nodded when Paloma finished. "A good man. He showed up about a year ago, restoring an old staircase in the hall. He noticed Paulina and seemed to bond with her. He began coming every week, bringing books, carving wooden toys. The child got attention, and we got help with repairs." She opened an old-fashioned cabinet and pulled out a cardboard folder with the child's file. "Paulina Reyes, 7 years old," she began, flipping through the pages. "Mother abandoned her at the hospital, father unknown. Reason for abandonment, congenital heart defect, multiple defects. The survival prognosis was minimal." Paloma leaned forward, professional curiosity instantly awakened. "What exactly was the defect?" "Here's the hospital report." Senora Luz Maria handed her the excerpt. Paloma quickly skimmed through the medical terms, and a chill ran down her spine. The girl had precisely the condition she had recently made a breakthrough in treating, a complex combination of ventricular septal defects with transposition of the great arteries. "We consulted many surgeons," Senora Luz Maria continued. "They all shrugged, too complex, too risky. And now, imagine this, after 7 years, the biological mother shows up. She says she repented, wants to take her daughter back. And in reality?" "In reality?" Paloma asked, sensing something was wrong. She found out that disabled children are entitled to higher benefits, so she remembered motherhood. The director bitterly smiled. "Socorro Reyes, known in certain circles, 3 police arrests, alcoholism, living with a drug addict. It's a good thing the legal abandonment was complete, otherwise we wouldn't have been able to do anything." She rose from behind the desk. "Let's go. I'll introduce you to Paulina. But please, she doesn't know that the man is in the hospital. We told her he went away on business." They walked through the corridor to a spacious playroom. By the window, bathed in the light of the setting sun, sat a small figure. The little girl with a thoughtful expression was sorting through dried plants, laying them between the pages of a thick book. "Paulina, you have a visitor," Senora Luz Maria gently called. The girl looked up, and Paloma involuntarily froze. It was an astonishing face, delicate features, widely spaced eyes of an unusual gray-green hue, pale skin with a faint bluish tint, a characteristic sign of oxygen deprivation due to heart failure. But that wasn't the most important part. In the child's gaze, there was such depth, such an otherworldly calm, that it seemed she knew far more than her age suggested. "Hello," Paulina said quietly, setting aside her herbarium. "Are you from Uncle Sarapin?" The question was unexpected, and Paloma hesitated. How did this girl know? "I know Uncle Sarapin," Paloma answered carefully, sitting next to her. "Do you collect herbariums?" Paulina nodded, gently smoothing out a clover leaf. "Uncle Sarapin said that herbs help heal people. And I want to be a doctor when I grow up." "If I grow up?" The last words were spoken so simply, with such childlike resignation, that Paloma's heart ached. "Did he visit you often?" "Every week," Paulina nodded. "He would tell me about old buildings and carve wooden toys for me. Look." She took a small bird figurine out of her pocket, a hummingbird, poised to take flight, with delicately carved feathers. Uncle Sarapin said that someday he'll teach me to do this too, the girl continued, gently stroking the wooden bird. He promised, and he always keeps his word. That's why I know he'll come back. These simple words of childlike faith pierced Paulina more sharply than any scalpel. She felt something inside her change, flip over, and take on a new form. Can I listen to you? Paulina asked, pulling a stethoscope from her bag. Paulina nodded seriously and unbuttoned the top button of her dress. She seemed accustomed to medical exams and accepted them as an inevitable part of life. Placing the stethoscope on the fragile chest, Paulina listened, and the girl's heart spoke to her in its own language of sounds and rhythms. She heard the ominous stenosis, the intertwined blood flow, the struggle of the small organ with a fate already determined before birth. But she also heard something else, the persistence with which this heart continued to beat, the strength contained in this imperfect but indomitable organ. The blood must flow through its paths, the voice of her grandmother Carmen seemed to whisper, and Paulina suddenly saw clearly how this pathology could be corrected. You have a very brave heart, she said, removing the stethoscope. You know, I'm a doctor too, but I treat hearts. Paulina's eyes widened. Really? Will you be able to fix mine? Then I won't get tired so quickly, and I'll be able to run like the other children. Paulina gently took her hand. I'll try. I have a new method that might help hearts as special as yours. Paulina looked at her thoughtfully, as if seeing straight through her. Uncle Sarapin said that my heart isn't broken, it's just made in its own way. And that it's learned to be strong because it's harder for it than for others. In those words, spoken in a child's voice, Paulina recognized the deep wisdom of someone who had traveled their own path of suffering. Sarapin had spoken about the girl's heart, but it seemed he was also speaking about his own soul. She carefully hugged Paulina, feeling the fragile bones beneath her palm. The girl smelled of baby soap and something herbal, perhaps from the herbarium, or maybe from her own special essence. In that moment, Paulina made a decision, firm, irreversible, coming from the depths of her soul, as though it had been predestined long before their meeting. Paulina, she said softly, would you like to live in a house with a garden full of real herbs? Where you can collect different plants and make a herbarium? And where Uncle Sarapin can visit you and teach you woodcarving? The girl looked at her seriously, evaluating what she had said with a mature look. That would be nice. But don't such houses go to children without parents? Paulina smiled, for the first time in a long while, sincerely, from the heart. Sometimes fate weaves the threads of our lives so curiously that we don't immediately understand its design. But then, when the pattern reveals itself, all that's left is to follow it. After leaving the orphanage, she sat in the car for a long time, staring at the sunset sky. A strange warmth spread inside her, as though a spring breeze had awakened something long dormant deep within her soul. As if an old wound had begun to heal, giving way to something new, something still unnamed. In her pocket, the wooden rose rested, and holding it, Paulina felt like she was holding onto a promise, made both to herself, and to Paulina, and to the silent Sarapin. Their fates would no longer go separately. For sometimes, the most broken heart can become the source of the strongest love. The bureaucratic corridors of life turned out to be more tangled for Paulina than the labyrinths of blood vessels. The stack of documents on her desk grew every day, references, certificates, testimonies, copies of diplomas, various extracts. Dr. Mendoza, do you understand that taking care of a child with a severe heart defect is a huge responsibility? Asked the child welfare inspector, a woman with a habit of fiddling with the beads on her neck. You work long hours yourself, how do you plan to provide care? It's as if someone in the orphanage is watching her around the clock, Paulina wanted to reply, but she held back. I have the option to switch to a reduced schedule, she explained calmly. And my financial situation allows me to hire a sitter during my absence. The inspector sighed and handed over another form. Fill this out too. And don't forget the tuberculosis clinic certificate. And the psychiatrist's conclusion. And the drug addiction report. And In the evenings, after many hours of surgery and rounds, Paulina drove to the ICU to see Sarapin. His condition remained critically stable, but doctors noted slight positive shifts, normalization of blood pressure, improved reflexes. Paulina asks about you every day, Paulina said quietly, sitting by his bed. I told her you're far away but will definitely come back. She talked about her struggle with the guardianship, her plans for Paulina's surgery, about the orphanage. And it seemed to her that sometimes Sarapin's eyelids would twitch slightly, as though he heard her and was trying to respond. I brought you a greeting from Paulina today. Paulina took a child's drawing from her folder. Look, she drew you as a woodcarver. See? You have tools in your hands, and around you is the forest. She said that trees are your friends. Paulina attached the drawing to the wall near the bed, next to the other children's drawings that were already there. She also makes a herbarium. Like my grandmother used to. Funny, isn't it? Such coincidences. The machines beeped monotonously, and the chest under the thin blanket rose and fell evenly. Paulina gently touched his hand, cool, limp, but still bearing the marks of calluses from tools. You must come back, she whispered. Paulina needs a woodcarving teacher. And I'd like to get to know you better. She didn't finish the sentence, not knowing how to end it. The storm broke when the guardianship process was already halfway through. Socorro Reyes appeared at the child welfare agency with a lawyer, a slippery character with slick back hair and a keen look. I'm the mother, and I have the priority right to take my child, Socorro said with a stern face and cold eyes. No stranger has the right to take my daughter. The inspector fumbled through the papers. But you signed the relinquishment. Under pressure. Socorro exclaimed. They told me the child would die. But now my girl is alive, and I want to take her home. The lawyer laid some papers on the table. My client is now in stable remission, has permanent residence and stable income. Here are all the confirming documents. Paulina sat opposite them, feeling an icy fury growing inside her. This woman had abandoned her newborn child, condemning her to death or eternal orphanhood. And now, having heard about the possibility of receiving benefits for a disabled child, she suddenly remembered her maternal feelings. I think we should discuss the latest medical conclusions, Paulina said evenly. Paulina needs a complex heart surgery. The postoperative period will require special conditions, which will be provided, Socorro interrupted. I have all the means to do so. With what money? Paulina wanted to ask, but instead, she calmly laid out the documents on the table, the operation plans, the rehabilitation schedule, the list of necessary medications and procedures. The rehabilitation will take at least a year, she said. It will require regular cardiologist monitoring, physiotherapy, a special diet, and a limited activity regime. Do you have the means to provide for this? Socorro pressed her lips together. I'm a mother. I have all the rights. And I won't let some. What exactly she wouldn't let some remain unsaid. The lawyer timely placed his hand on his client's elbow, halting the stream of curses. Leaving the office, Paulina felt stunned. Could the system really be so blind that it would give a child to a woman for whom motherhood was just a way to get benefits? She didn't go home but turned toward the cemetery, following a sudden impulse. The old caretaker greeted her with undisguised joy. Dr. Mendoza. Glad to see you again. How is Sarapin? What do the doctors say? Don Ramiro listened to the sad news with sympathy, nodding his gray head. Our fighter is holding on. That's good. Guys like him don't just go away. They sat on the old bench by the cemetery gates, and Paulina, not knowing why, told the old man about Paulina, her attempts to gain custody, and the sudden appearance of the biological mother. Reyes? Don Ramiro suddenly perked up. Socorro Reyes? I know these Reyeses like the back of my hand. They have a grave here. Grandfather's. We have it. Oh, he was a serious old man, a frontline soldier, worked as a teacher in Bogota after the war. Socorro raised her after the daughter's death, but he couldn't handle her. She ran away from him at 16, got involved with some bandits. Paloma leaned forward. Are you sure it's her? Sure I am, the old man replied indignantly. I remember her when she was just a kid. Her grandfather used to bring her to her mother's grave. Socorro Reyes, I'm telling you. And she gave up the child because her boyfriend, Esteban, hated kids. She admitted it when she came to the cemetery drunk, crying to her grandfather. She said, it's either me or the bastard. So, she chose. Senora Luz Maria, the director of the orphanage, turned out to be an unexpected and strong ally. After reading the child welfare reports, she firmly sided with Paloma. I've been working with abandoned children for 40 years, she said to the service. I can spot a fake from a mile away. This woman doesn't want the child, she wants the benefits. And I won't allow this little girl's life to be ruined. Faced with strong opposition, Socorro backed down, but only for a time. Her lawyer hinted at new lawsuits, appeals, and additional checks on the potential guardian. And time was mercilessly slipping away. Paulina's condition worsened with each passing day. Paloma saw this during the checkups. The blueness of her lips grew worse, shortness of breath appeared with the slightest exertion, and the swelling became more noticeable. The girl's heart was working at its limits, and the compensatory mechanisms were wearing out. We can't wait any longer, Paloma said firmly during the council meeting. Another month of this strain, and her heart simply won't hold up. But the guardianship process isn't completed, the hospital lawyer objected. Who will give consent for the operation? Who takes legal responsibility? At that moment, Senora Luz Maria entered the office, straight as a rod, with a determined look. At the moment, Paulina Reyes is under the care of the state, specifically the Esperanza orphanage. And I, as the director, give my consent for the operation. Here are all the documents. She placed a folder with perfectly organized papers on the table. Good, Paloma nodded. Let's prepare the child for surgery. Paulina lay on the operating table, small, pale, with translucent skin through which bluish veins showed. Paloma leaned over her. Don't be afraid, little one. I'll fix it. I'm not afraid, the girl whispered. You know how to fix hearts. If you're Sarapin's friend, then I trust you. Paloma smiled through her mask. Rest now. When you wake up, it will be easier to breathe. The anesthesia worked quickly, Paulina's eyelids fluttered and closed. Paloma straightened up, feeling a strange, almost forgotten feeling gather inside her, a mix of determination, fear, and some ancient strength, as though an ancestral memory was awakening within her. Scalpel, she said, and the fight for the little life began. The operation lasted 7 hours. Each stage had been practiced theoretically, but in reality, everything turned out to be more complicated. The blood vessels were thinner than expected, the septal defects were multiple, not just one. At one point, when the tiny heart stopped under her hands, Paloma felt her back grow cold. What if she's wrong? What if her method doesn't work? And then something strange happened, like a warm wave rising from the medallion around her neck, spreading through her arms to the very tips of her fingers. For a moment, the wrinkled face of her grandmother Carmen appeared before her eyes, stern but kind, with wise eyes that had seen so much life and death. Blood must flow along its paths, Palomita. Guide it, but do not force it, her voice seemed to whisper. And Paloma understood what to do next. Her hands now moved with incredible precision, as if guided by something greater than just medical knowledge. As if nature itself, life itself, was showing her the next step. When the operation neared its end, and little Paulina's heart began to beat again, on its own, steady and strong, Paloma felt as though the last of her strength drained out of her. Her legs gave way, her hands shook, and circles swam before her eyes. Dr. Mendoza, are you okay? The anesthesiologist asked worriedly, supporting her under the elbow. Yes, just tired, she smiled weakly. Everything's fine. It worked. Leaving the operating room, she nearly collapsed onto the couch in the doctor's office. The exhaustion was not only physical, it felt as if she had given part of her life force to that little being on the operating table. But when the monitors showed steady heartbeats, even breathing, and normalizing blood pressure, Paloma felt a quiet joy fill her. She had saved Paulina. Now, she only needed to save Sarapin and herself. Grandmother Carmen was right. True healing requires not only skill, but love and faith. And faith is the hardest trial for a person with a broken heart. Spring was rapidly turning into summer, just as it does only in the Colombian valleys. Yesterday, timid little leaves; today, lush greenery. Outside the window of the room where Paulina lay, a guava tree was blooming, filling the air with its sweet aroma. Every morning, Paloma entered that room with a racing heart. Despite the successful surgery, the first days are always the most dangerous. But Paulina was surprising everyone. Her recovery was so fast, it was as if her little body, freed from the burden of defect, was making up for lost time. "This girl has the strongest will to live," the elderly cardiologist who had been present at the operation shook his head. "In 40 years of practice, I've never seen anything like it. It's like she's not a child, but a little fighter." Paloma just nodded silently. She knew what drove Paulina, not just the thirst for life, but the thirst for love. For the first time, the little girl felt that someone truly needed her. Meanwhile, the legal battles were drawing to a close. Paulina's mother retreated unexpectedly quickly when it was revealed that her stable income was tied to illegal activities. A police investigation, initiated by the Child Welfare Service, uncovered her involvement with local criminal gangs engaged in fraud. The lawyer disappeared along with his client. From that moment on, everything went smoothly. Luz Maria personally took on the task of helping with the paperwork. "I've spent my life parting with children, sending them to new families," she said, flipping through the papers. "But I've rarely been as sure of the right choice." 2 weeks flew by unnoticed. Paulina was already getting out of bed, walking around the room, even going for short walks. A rosy blush, for the first time in her life, colored her cheeks. Like a field poppy in bloom, Paloma thought, remembering her grandmother's comparisons. Returning from the laboratory, where she was checking Paulina's test results, Paloma heard a conversation coming from the room. "Is Mom coming soon?" a little voice asked. "She's coming, sweetie, she's coming," the nurse replied. "She went to get your test results." Paloma froze at the door. "Mom." Paulina had called her that for the first time, accidentally, naturally, as if the word had slipped out on its own. Something inside her trembled, like a touched string. Its sound was painful and sweet at the same time. For so many years, she had dreamed of having a child. So many operations she had performed, saving other people's children. And now, this little girl with wise eyes and an old soul, with her simple word, had broken down the wall Paloma had built around her heart for 4 long years. If Paulina's recovery reminded Paloma of a May dawn, rapid, bright, full of life, then Sarapin's condition was like the lingering winter twilight. The coma didn't recede, although brain activity showed unstable but positive changes. Paloma didn't give up. She consulted with leading neurologists, studied the latest techniques, and tried experimental treatment protocols. And every evening, like a prayer, she told him about Paulina. Today, for the first time, she made it to the end of the corridor and returned without shortness of breath, Paloma said, sitting on the edge of the hospital bed. "Her heart is working flawlessly. I would even say, better than many healthy hearts. It's as if it's making up for lost time." She told him about the legal struggles, the plans for Paulina's move, and how she was preparing a room for her in her home. Another evening in early June brought change, fragile, cautious, like the first steps of a baby. Paulina, who had finally been allowed brief outings from the ward, asked to visit her uncle Sarapin. At that point, Paloma gently told her what had happened to Sarapin. "I want to tell him how my heart is beating correctly now," she explained, holding Paloma's hand tightly. "He'll be happy to know." The little girl entered the room confidently, walked to the bed, and took Sarapin's hand. "Hello, Uncle Sarapin," she said as naturally as she spoke to Paloma. "I know you can hear me." Aunt Paloma fixed my heart. "Now it beats properly. Can you hear it?" She pressed his hand to her chest. Thump thump. Like a clock. The room became surprisingly quiet, as if even the machine stopped beeping, listening to the child's voice. And I'll have a new home, Paulina continued, gently stroking his limp hand. With a garden and even an attic. Aunt Paloma said there's lots of space for herbs. I'll collect a herbarium, and we'll plant many beautiful flowers. She spoke to him for a long time, about the hospital, about her room with a view of the lilacs, and the new friends she had made in the ward. Here, I drew you something, she said, pinning a new picture to the wall. This is the intersection where you saved me. But I drew it correctly, without the accident. The drawing did indeed show an intersection bathed in sunlight, framed by blooming trees. 3 figures walked across it, holding hands, a tall man, a woman in a white coat, and a little girl between them. This is me, you, and Uncle Sarapin, she explained to Paloma. This is how it should be, right? On the wall was an entire gallery of childlike drawings, trees, flowers, animals, and people drawn with that special innocence that can't be faked. At the bottom of each page, there was a name, Paulina, written carefully, with pressure. That night, Paloma was on duty in the ward. Around 3 o'clock, the phone rang. It was from the intensive care unit. Paloma Mendoza. Urgently, here. The nurse's voice was filled with anxiety. Her heart stopped. Could it be? The thought that Sarapin might be gone brought a physical pain. She rushed through the corridors, almost flying. She burst into the room, ready for the worst, and froze in the doorway. Sarapin was sitting in bed, propped up by pillows. His eyes were open, still the same gray, attentive eyes, but now with a shadow of the suffering he had endured. Where is the girl? He rasped when he saw Paloma. What happened to her? These were the first words he had spoken after waking up. She's fine, Paloma whispered, stepping closer. Thanks to you, Sarapin. You saved her life. He leaned back on the pillow as if this news had drained his last bit of energy. Paulina is alive, he whispered. Then it was all worth it. Recovery was slow, but steady. At first, Sarapin could speak for only a few minutes, then for half an hour. Gradually, his strength began to return. Paloma came every day, not just as a doctor, but as a friend. Paulina brought drawings, told stories, and sat with her head bent over her herbarium notebook. An unspoken bond formed between the two of them, like a silent kinship of souls. One day, when Paulina left the room, escorted by a nurse, Sarapin spoke for the first time about the past. You're probably wondering how I'm connected to this little girl, he began, looking out the window, where the poplars rustled. Why did a homeless restorer risk his life for an orphan? I have an idea, Paloma replied quietly. You were a volunteer at the orphanage. He nodded. They called me to repair the old staircase, old wood, delicate work. There was warmth in his voice when he spoke about the wood, almost as if it were a living being. That's where I first saw Paulina, small, pale, with those amazing eyes. She was sitting on the stairs, watching me work. Then she asked, Are you healing the wood? Sarapin smiled at the memory. Such a strange comparison. But in a way, it's true. I was healing, not just the wood, but myself. After the war, after everything I saw there, I couldn't find a place for myself among people. The world seemed foreign, hostile. My wife couldn't bear my silence. Friends turned away from my reclusiveness. I became a loner, first out of necessity, then out of habit. He paused, lost in thought. And then this little girl, with her own wound in her heart, with her quiet wisdom. In her, I saw some kind of kinship. It was as if we were both wounded, but not broken. She showed me her herbarium, asked about the herbs. I started coming more often. I carved toys for her. Promised to teach her carving. She remembers that promise, Paloma nodded. And then that day happened, Sarapin continued. I was on my way to the orphanage, bringing her a new toy. And I saw her run out onto the road after a ball. Someone had thrown it while playing. And the car was going too fast. I didn't think, I just rushed forward. He closed his eyes, remembering. You know, at that moment, I felt alive for the first time in years. As if everything finally made sense. Paloma gently took his hand, the hand of the master, who saved a child, now resting in her palm, warm and strong. Outside, birds were singing, the leaves rustling, and the summer air flowed, filled with the scent of flowers. The world continued its eternal movement, and three hearts, which had found each other at the crossroads of fate, wove themselves into this endless symphony of life, each wounded in its own way, but each healed in its own way. The June morning was clear and vibrant, as if the sky itself rejoiced at the changes in the lives of the three people whose paths had intertwined so intricately. Paloma stood by the window of the ward, watching as the sun's rays transformed the hospital courtyard, turning the sterile austerity into a living canvas of light and shadow. Today was a special day, a double celebration. Two events, like two streams, merged into one flow. Sarapin was being discharged from the hospital, and Paloma had received the final decision from the Child Welfare Service. She was officially becoming Paulina's guardian. The paper with seals and signatures lay in her bag, and at times Paloma felt as though the document radiated warmth, comforting her through skin and fabric. "Ready?" she asked, turning to Paulina. The little girl nodded, clutching a bouquet of wildflowers to her chest, gathered the day before in a vacant lot behind the hospital. Simple flowers, but gathered with love, they seemed more precious than greenhouse roses. "These are his favorites," Paulina said seriously. "Uncle Sarapin said that wildflowers are the bravest, they grow wherever they can, but still bloom beautifully." They stepped onto the hospital's porch and froze, waiting. After a few minutes, the glass doors opened, and Sarapin appeared, still pale, noticeably thinner, but with the same steady gaze. A nurse walked alongside him, carrying a small bag of his belongings. Paulina couldn't wait. She pulled her hand from Paloma's and ran toward Sarapin. He saw the running girl, smiled widely, and, leaning on the railing, crouched down, arms open. She flew into them like a bird into a nest, wrapping her arms around his neck. "You're back," she breathed into his shoulder. "I knew you'd come back." Despite his not fully recovered strength, Sarapin lifted the girl easily, holding her close. "I promised," he replied simply, and in those two words, there was more than what long speeches could express. Paloma stood aside, not daring to interrupt this moment. Something tightened inside her at the sight of their reunion, the fatherly tenderness of Sarapin, the child's trust in Paulina, and then it stung. He could have died. As if sensing her thoughts, Sarapin looked at Paloma over the child's head, and in his eyes, she read understanding, quiet gratitude, and something else, deep, unspoken, but already a part of their shared story. "Hello, Dr. Mendoza," he said with a light smile. "It seems that thanks to you, I'm still here." "Likewise," she replied, stepping closer. "If not for you, Paulina might not be with us." "So it seems we're even," Sarapin nodded, carefully lowering the girl to the ground. They walked to Paloma's car, and from the outside, they could have looked like an ordinary family, mother, father, and daughter. Paulina held both of their hands, occasionally jumping with joy, while they exchanged glances over her head, like longtime partners. In the car, Paloma decided to ask the question that had been bothering her for a few days. "Sarapin, do you have a place to stay after your discharge?" He was silent for a moment, gazing out the window at the passing city landscapes. "I have a room at the cemetery caretaker's house," he finally replied. "Don Ramiro took me in. Not a mansion, of course, but it's enough for one person." Paloma tightened her grip on the steering wheel. "I have an offer. Actually, two. And both involve a house. Go ahead." He turned to her, watching her profile closely. "I inherited an old house on the outskirts from my grandmother. I haven't been there in many years, but I know it needs serious restoration. Especially the wooden elements, there are carved window frames. I thought, maybe you'd agree to take on the work. And..." She hesitated for a moment. "Live there during the restoration. The house is big, there's plenty of room for everyone." A silence fell in the car, broken only by the sound of tires on asphalt. Paloma didn't dare to look at Sarapin, afraid of seeing disbelief or, worse, pity in his eyes. "So you're offering me work with accommodation?" He said it calmly, without mockery. "Yes," she replied simply. "Paulina is moving in with me. She needs special care after the surgery, and—" Paloma took a breath. "She would be very happy if you were nearby." From the back seat, there was a happy exclamation. Paulina, who had been listening to their conversation, couldn't hold back her emotions. "Uncle Sarapin, say yes. Please. We'll live together, and you'll teach me how to carve wood, like you promised." Sarapin turned to the girl, and his stern face softened. Then he looked back at Paloma, long, thoughtful, as if trying to read her true motives. "I agree," he finally said. "But with one condition. You'll pay me fairly, according to market rates, without any discounts for circumstances." Paloma smiled, feeling the internal tension ease. "Deal?" A fair bargain between a doctor and a restorer. Their first joint journey led them to the cemetery. Paloma hadn't planned on this, but when Sarapin asked if they could stop by to pick up his tools, she understood it was the right thing to do. They all needed to pay their respects, each in their own way. The old cemetery greeted them with its shady coolness and the scent of freshly cut grass. Don Ramiro, upon seeing Sarapin, threw up his hands and rushed to hug him, tears in his eyes. "Resurrected from the dead," the old man exclaimed. "I thought I wouldn't see you again." While Sarapin gathered his belongings and tools, Paloma led Paulina to her husband's grave. The little girl walked solemnly, gripping her hand tightly. "Is this your husband?" she asked, looking at the portrait on the tombstone. "Yes," Paloma replied softly. "His name was Diego. He was an architect." They stood silently by the grave. Paloma noticed that someone, probably Don Ramiro, had been keeping the place tidy. The grass was trimmed, and the flowers watered. Suddenly, Paulina pulled a folded piece of paper from her dress pocket, one of her drawings. "Can I put this here for him?" she asked, unfolding the sheet. The drawing depicted a house, not an ordinary one, but one seemingly floating among the clouds, with windows from which warm yellow light poured out. "This is his new home in the sky, Uncle Diego," Paulina said, carefully placing the drawing on the gravestone and pressing it down with a small stone. "Mom says you were a good man." Paloma couldn't hold back her tears. She knelt and tightly hugged the little girl, hiding her face in the child's hair, which smelled of the hospital and the sun. "Thank you, my dear," she whispered. "I think he would have liked it." Sarapin, who had approached, silently stood next to them. Paloma's grandmother's house stood on the edge of the city, where the streets turned into country roads, and the bustle of the city gave way to the slow pace of rural life. The old house, darkened by time, with a strong brick foundation and a sagging fence. But the house's true treasure was hidden inside and in the overgrown garden where her grandmother had once grown her healing herbs. The key turned with difficulty in the lock, as if the house itself resisted the intrusion of strangers. But as the door creaked open, Paloma was enveloped by the familiar smell she had known since childhood: dried herbs, old wood. "Be careful, it might be dusty in here," she warned, entering first. They toured the house, the spacious living room, the small bedrooms, the nook where her grandmother had once treated patients. Everywhere there was a sense of age, carefully preserved by previous generations. Sarapin studied the wooden elements with professional interest. "This is a real treasure," he said, running his fingers over the patterns. "There are no craftsmen like this anymore. But it can be restored, the style can be preserved." Paloma opened cabinets, dressers, and drawers, as though immersing herself in her childhood. "Here's old clothing, old dishes. Mom said we should sell all this," she said thoughtfully. "That the old stuff just takes up space." But grandmother always replied, "You can't sell the roots, daughter. Without roots, the tree withers." Paulina was exploring the house in her own way. She peeked into every corner, touched the old things, and sniffed the dried herbs still hanging in bunches from the ceiling. "And what's that?" She pointed to a heavy box standing in the far corner of the room. I don't know, Paloma admitted. I remember it was always locked. Grandmother said it contained family relics. They opened the box, and inside were bundles of linen cloth, old photographs, letters, and some documents. Paloma carefully sifted through them, and each item seemed to tell the story of her family, a family that had always included women with the gift of healing. At the very bottom of the chest was a sealed envelope with the words to Paloma, "When the time comes." The handwriting was her grandmother's, large, confident, with a slight rightward slant. Paloma opened the envelope with trembling hands. "Hello, my dear granddaughter," the letter began. "If you are reading these lines, then I am gone, and you have returned to our home. I always knew this would happen, even though your journey wouldn't be easy." Paloma read, and her grandmother's voice seemed to echo in the room, cutting through the years that had passed. "I won't say much about our gift, you've already understood everything yourself. The gift of healing passes down the female line, from mother to daughter, from grandmother to granddaughter. But it's not given to everyone, only to those with a pure and open heart. Your heart, Paloma, is your greatest tool. It must be open in order to heal. Know this, my dear, healing is needed not just for the body but for the soul. Often, the physical wound is only a reflection of the wound in the soul. And the other way around. So heal not only with your hands but also with your heart. Listen to it, it's wiser than any textbook. And remember, my dear, our gift is not given for ourselves, but for others. Use it with love, and it will never run dry. Like a spring, it gives more, and the more it gives, the stronger it flows." The last lines blurred before Paloma's eyes, tears clouded her vision. "And one more thing, Paloma. Don't be afraid to love again. The heart is like the earth after winter, it seems to have frozen through, but when the time comes, it blooms again. Don't lock it away, don't hide it from life. That is true healing." Paloma closed her eyes, pressing the letter to her chest. It felt as though time and space collapsed, and her grandmother stood next to her, placing her warm, wrinkled hand on her shoulder. "What's in there, Mom?" Paulina asked softly, the first time she had consciously called her that, not by accident. "Wisdom," Paloma whispered. "And a blessing." She looked at Paulina, at Sarapin, and suddenly realized with piercing clarity, all three souls gathered in this house needed healing and had received it. The girl with the sick heart, the man with the wounded soul, the woman with her love buried. The circle was complete. Paulina was already settled at the old table, drawing, engrossed, completely absorbed. Paloma peeked over her shoulder. On the paper, a house was taking shape, the very same house they were in, but renewed, with a bright sun above the roof and three little figures in the garden. "This is our house," the little girl explained, not looking up from her drawing. "It has lots of light and three happy people." A year later. The apple trees in the garden were heavy with ripened fruit, their branches drooping toward the ground. Paloma sat on the porch, watching as Paulina helped Sarapin in his workshop, a small extension set up in the yard. The girl, stronger now, sun-kissed with rosy cheeks, was focused on sanding a wooden figure, smoothing it to perfection. Her heart was working flawlessly, the complex surgery had yielded a magnificent result, surpassing even the boldest expectations of the doctors. Sarapin leaned over the workbench, carving another toy for the children's hospital. Over the course of the year, his hands had created dozens of wooden wonders, dolls, animals, mythical creatures, bringing joy to little patients. In the same time, he had transformed the old house beyond recognition. Drawing on the architectural legacy left by Diego, whose sketchbooks Paloma had kept all these years, he had restored the carved elements, reinforced the structures, and breathed new life into the ancient walls. Paloma continued to save children's hearts. Her method had gained national recognition, and cardiothoracic surgeons from other cities came to learn from her. But now, work had stopped being the sole purpose of her existence. There was the house, the daughter, and more often thoughts of the future, where perhaps there would be room for new love. Sarapin called out to Paulina, showing her a new carving technique. Then he looked up and met Paloma's gaze. He smiled, openly, brightly, without the shadow of his previous wariness. He walked over to the porch and sat next to her. Their shoulders brushed, an accidental touch that warmed the heart. "You know, Paloma," he said, looking at Paulina playing in the garden, "sometimes you have to lose everything to find the most important thing." "The most important thing is being able to start over," she replied, holding her grandmother's medallion tightly in her hand. The circle had closed. The wounds had healed. The hearts had mended. And the ancient herbs in her grandmother's garden, revived by Paulina's caring hands, quietly whispered in the wind the eternal wisdom: true love is stronger than death, and true healing comes only when you open your heart to a new life.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.